Excellent. Okay, so my name's Joey Aiello. I'm the program manager for PowerShell and for Win32-OpenSSH. The stuff I own includes Windows PowerShell, PowerShell Core, all the OSS tooling stuff we got, Script Analyzer, VS Code PowerShell. So a bunch of what you see on GitHub is in my area of ownership. Yeah, if you have any questions about any of that stuff, feel free to find me at the conference and we can talk. So let's jump right in. Here we go. So PowerShell Core 6.0, we GA'd in January. Very exciting stuff. We've been in alpha for about a year and a half. What's the point of PowerShell Core? You've heard this 1,000 times. It's to be able to manage your heterogeneous environments, so your Windows machines, Mac machines, Linux machines, in the hybrid cloud. So whether it's on-prem in your own data center, or sitting in an Azure stack as part of a hybrid cloud scenario, or you're in one of the big public clouds like us and Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, VMware, anything, anywhere is the point of PowerShell Core. So we shipped it on Jan 10th. The first thing I should say about it is thank you. This is not something that we could have done without the help of our contributors. As Jeffrey mentioned, about 50% of our pull requests that came in were from outside Microsoft. So we got a whole host of new features and bug fixes that we never planned on making. In particular, there was massive improvements made to the web commandlets, all kinds of bug fixes made in the JSON commandlets. It's really, there's a bunch of delighters sprinkled throughout, so I highly encourage you to see who all those contributors are, how much that stuff's coming in from Microsoft, and also to look at our release notes for the big features that were added by people in the community. But really, the big rocks for PowerShell Core were cross-platform, Windows, Mac, and Linux. This was a big one. Side-by-side and portable. A lot of people don't really see this as a huge feature. For us, this was actually the guiding tenet of PowerShell Core when we first started on the project. So we realized that WMF reboots are really expensive. Having a singleton on the box is really expensive, so only having one Windows PowerShell. Unfortunately, that's a limitation of .NET Framework, but with .NET Core, we're able to ship a portable version of PowerShell so that you just unzip PowerShell Core to a directory, double-click PWSH, and you're operating in a brand new version without touching your existing installation. So this is really awesome if you want to try PowerShell Core out, you want to find out if your scripts work on it, and you don't want to have to deal with like a double reboot situation where you're updating PowerShell, uninstalling it because you found out it broke Exchange or something, and then having to do another update when you do the rollback, right? So you could actually have N versions of PowerShell on a machine and find out which one works best for you in real time. And then the SSH-based PowerShell remoting, which I'm going to be shown in a little bit. This is using the existing PS session commandlets, enter PS session, new PS session, with SSH instead of WinRM as the transport protocol. So you're actually using, public-private key authorization or just plain old password off with SSH in order to make that connection. So let's talk about coverage. That meme of me that Jeffrey put up is pretty accurate. I spend most of my day thinking about coverage, talking to people on coverage. So really the central goal here is that the success of PowerShell Core really depends on you being able to retain your skill set that you've learned thus far. So you guys have all spent a bunch of time learning PowerShell, and if we were to say, hey, with PowerShell Core, we're throwing all that out the window, then all of a sudden we lose all the momentum and the ecosystem that's been built up around the last 10 to 12 years, and we really don't want to do that. We want you guys to suddenly be able to do more with your skill set rather than less. So to that end, I'm working, and within the team, we're working heavily with Azure, Windows, and Office to bring a lot of that coverage in. There's multiple trains going on right now, various levels of engagement that we have with these teams. But generally speaking, we want to bring as many of the modules that are currently in use forward as possible. We said this before, Azure RM.NET Core about a week ago put out an update to their preview module for this that now has all of the commandlets included. They've not been heavily tested yet, but we know that they compile, and generally speaking, they run. So don't depend on any production workloads with that thing yet, but know that it is coming, and it's really, really important to us. So they're making a ton of progress. We've also got the Windows PowerShell compatibility pack. As Jeffrey showed, this is using this sort of transparent implicit remoting to a local Windows PowerShell instance. The usability of this thing has not been defined yet. At some point there'll be an RFC. At some point, some issues will come up around how we want to expose this. But generally speaking, the technology is there, and it works really great as a stopgap as long as you're okay with getting dead objects back over the wire. So for those of you unfamiliar with dead objects, basically the methods that are attached to that object you can't run because the object you're getting back has been deserialized and then reserialized when it gets to your session. But generally speaking, we think this is going to be useful for folks that just want to use PowerShell Core as their primary sort of development environment or IT environment. It will also supplant the Windows PS module path module that loads all of your Windows PowerShell modules into the same module path. And at some point, we'll introduce some functionality in this module to manage the legacy aliases. We know there's been some controversies around, what happened to LS in Linux, or, we got rid of SC, right, for set content in Windows. So we know that we're sort of not being consistent with our aliases, and we want to sort of bring a level of consistency and an abstraction layer into the compatibility pack that lets you manage that. So I'm not going to ask this question now because I think we're a little short on time, but please come and tell me, if you are blocked on using PowerShell Core, which modules that you're blocked on. Actually, let's just do like quick show of hands. Who primarily needs like modules that ship in Windows working on PowerShell Core that aren't today? Okay. What's that? So there's a large set of modules that ship in Windows and Windows Server, like NetAdapter or BitLocker or iSCSI, Windows Update, all those modules that don't really ship as part of PowerShell, even though they sit in PS Home. But yeah, that set of modules. Okay, O365, Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, Teams, all that good stuff. Okay, Azure RM, cool. And then how about like Active Directory as a special case? That's the one. Okay, cool. And then SQL Server, yeah, SQL Server. Cool. I'm pretty sure I don't even have to bug that team because I think there's plenty of people just going and making sure that they do that. System Center, on-prem, like SCOM, SCCM. Okay, cool. SharePoint, I think I said SharePoint with the O365 stuff, but yeah, SharePoint Online, yep. Cool. So, like, you guys have heard this from us before, right? Like, oh, we're doing, a million, like, we had the experimental DSC resources, or I know I wasn't really around for this one, but we were really hard on workflows, right? So there's some cases where maybe with coverage we fell a little bit short, right? But the question here is, why are we optimistic about the move to PowerShell Core? Why is this time maybe a little bit different? The first answer is that there's a really clear transition path from Windows PowerShell to PowerShell Core, right? We built this thing called PowerShell Standard, I'm going to be talking about in a sec, for .NET that basically ensures that you compile against this thing, your module's going to work everywhere. And then the CDXML, PowerShell, all the P invokes, all that stuff's just going to continue working everywhere as well. So, Jeffrey showed earlier, the SIM modules just work in Core. I use Core as my daily driver. I just say, hey, Windows PS module path, add the whole thing. It's very rare that I hit anything that I'm trying to do where I actually break on a module. So already we know that we're pretty far along on this journey. Also, the goal here is to port everything, not to re-implement everything, right? So port work turns out to be a lot easier than telling people to design brand new commandlets or to grok this new concept of DSC. And basically, if you can recompile the thing and you can run your tests and it still works in PowerShell Core, then we're good and we can move on. Many of the hard problems here are reoccurring, in particular like 2FA for Azure PowerShell, right, Azure RM modules. That pattern is going to be reproduced for SharePoint Online and Exchange Online and the Azure AD module, right? There's these difficult challenges that we have, but once we solve it, there's generally 10 other modules that are waiting in the wings that are going to start working once we get past that gate. And then also the value out of PowerShell is really easy to communicate. When we go to teams, we tell them, look, PowerShell is cross-platform, now you have Mac and Linux users. PowerShell Core is way more performant. We had some numbers that we haven't published yet, but generally we see about 30 to 60% improvement in perf. Much of that as a result of .NET Core. In some cases we see stuff as high as like 300% improvement. So Perf is a huge one. And it's fully portable. Teams don't like managing their operating system and their PowerShell installation as like a single unit of goo. When you can tell a team, hey, you're running 08R2 in your infrastructure or 2012 R2, no problem, just drop this PowerShell down, and now you don't have to think about the operating system. That's a huge win for them as well. Now let's talk about remoting for a little bit. So there are 3 ways to remote with PowerShell Core. The first one is a traditional PowerShell remoting over WSMan WinRM. So that's going to continue to be supported for as long as we see. We've got PowerShell remoting over SSH now. Same semantics of the commandlets, brand new parameter set. Use dash hostname and dash hostname and dash username instead of dash computer name and dash credential. But generally speaking, is if you can set up an SSH server on the other end, you add one line to your SSHD config, and you're off to the races with full objects being passed over an SSH transport. And then, of course, you have plain text SSH remoting. So this is just using SSH like it's used everywhere else in the wild today. You SSH to a box. It gives you the default shell on that box, whether it's bash, CMD, or if you've configured it to be PowerShell. And then you just have a text-based shell where standard in and standard out are being piped over the wire. This isn't going to give you objects. It's not going to give you rich session management where you can disconnect and reconnect. It doesn't give you implicit remoting. But if you can get to the box and you can type text on it, then you can use PowerShell. There's a couple limitations around our remoting. One of those is that the PSRP WSMan-based server on non-Windows platforms is experimental. So today there is a way that you can stand up OMI, which is the open source WMI equivalent, and do some crazy configuration stuff and have a WSMan server running on Linux. Generally speaking, we think everybody that's running a Linux box, though, already has SSH set up on that box. So we think that that's going to be a much easier path for Linux users to take. And then the other one, the PSRP client, we do have a WSMan client for Windows, Mac, and Linux in PowerShell Core. Again, on non-Windows platforms, that thing does not support Kerberos today. That's a limitation we may be able to remove in the future. We've got an issue open for it, but please come there and let us know if that's important to you, because we do a couple hypotheses around remoting. One of those is that SSH is the future and everyone should use it. Who here is using SSH in some form or another today? Okay, who cannot use SSH today for some reason or another? Got one hand? Okay, talk to me afterwards because I want to know why. We think that everybody can use SSH. Sometimes you got a really, an environment where your business isn't going to let you because of some change control practice or opening a port 22 or whatever. But SSH is ubiquitous enough. We think that everybody should be okay having that conversation with their company. The flip side to this, though, is that we think that WSMan and WinRM are still very important and that we should continue to support it. So we know you've got 08R2 boxes that you're never putting a new server or service on. We know that you've got some of those difficult things that prevent you from introducing SSH into your environment. So for those, we're going to continue to have these parameter sets that support WSMan-based remoting. The other big one there, we're doing a ton of stuff with GIA, as Jeffrey was talking about. That's all totally based on WSMan WinRM today. We may do like a GIA over SSH at some point, but it requires total re-architecture. So if GIA is important to you, WinRM is important to you. Cool. Let's talk about the support lifecycle for a second. So PowerShell Core is supported under what Microsoft is calling the modern lifecycle policy. And basically, yes. Yep. Say that one more time.
Going to a GIA endpoint, will that give you problems from something not Windows?
Yeah, so the question is going to a GIA endpoint from a non-Windows platform going to give you trouble? I do not believe so, as long as you can authenticate to that thing. So it will give you trouble if you're doing GIA in a domain environment, which you probably are, where you'll need Kerberos authentication, which is why that's still something that we're looking at. But if you can get onto the box, NTLM or basic auth or whatever, then you can use GIA, I believe. But I should validate that for you. Okay, so the modern lifecycle policy. So this is really going in with Microsoft's sort of as a service model that you're starting to see in a lot of the different products, right? Windows is sort of more of a fixed forward world, except for the LTS branches. Office 365 is very fixed forward. So the modern lifecycle policy is intended to promote that same sort of lifecycle. And with this, we're saying that you have 6 months from a minor version release to update to that minor version. So if we look, PowerShell Core 6 came out on January 10th. Assuming that we ship PowerShell Core 6.1 by July 1st, then we will end support for 6.0 by the end of the year. So, you know, we really want you moving forward with us. We don't think that this is a problem yet, but I really would love to hear from people who say that updating to these minor versions is going to be an issue for them. We think there's a couple things that mitigates updating, namely the portable side-by-side installs, the fact that the changes being made here are more incremental, and so there's really less of a shift from version to version, and you know, we are pretty committed within the 6.x branch, although I'll get into this in a second, about not making breaking changes. And that's much easier to do in an open source world where everything is visible and well tagged, and you are able to hold us accountable. So I had one more question, yeah?
Yeah. By looking into the update process, something a little more seamless, like I update my modules from the gallery or something like that.
Yep, so the question was, are we looking at something that makes the update process more seamless? Generally speaking, we want to support the update mechanisms or the servicing mechanisms that exist on the platforms already. On Mac and Linux, that's been very easy because they have well-defined package management systems, Homebrew on Mac, and then the apt or yum or whatever on the various Linux distributions. On Windows, a lot of people have asked us for a commandlet to update PowerShell Core. There's a couple reasons why that's a little bit problematic. One of those is that updating PowerShell in place from PowerShell turns out to be a little tricky. So, you know, if update PS Core has some mechanism to run after you shut down all the PowerShells, that's one thing. But today, the MSIs that we ship are all update MSIs, so they'll do an in-place installation, assuming you have all your PowerShell windows closed. The other thing that we're doing on Windows is we're supporting what's called Microsoft Update. So if you own a Windows update, there's a little box that says like allow updates from other Microsoft products that aren't Windows. That thing we will support, and because that integrates with Windows Update, then you're going to get SCCM notifications. Everything will be in the Microsoft Update catalog. WSUS will be able to pull in that stuff. And you know, if you're in Windows Update, it'll say here's a recommended update for PowerShell. So we think that will definitely make the servicing a lot easier. At some point, somebody can then shim that up into a module, and you know, maybe update PS Core. You can run it from Windows PowerShell or something like that. But we think, generally speaking, admins want servicing stuff at scale and not, hey, my dev box needs a new version or whatever. PS Lifecycle AK.ms, that's where all the up-to-date support info is at. One thing I'll say right now is not to think too hard about the version number. So a lot of people have really drilled in like, well, what's 7 going to be? And like, how many minor versions of 6 are you going to do? And the reality is it doesn't really matter. Like, versions are just numbers. You know, at some point we might do a 7, but it'll probably just be more of a marketing shtick, or maybe there'll be a brand new .NET that we want to move to or something like that. But we think that this model of just revving that minor version all the time and staying on 6 is probably fine. But again, that's something we'll evaluate further into the future. The other thing is that we've heard some module developers say, hey, does this mean it's going to be a lot harder to like maintain my module, and you know, you're revving the versions all the time, I'm going to have to constantly be retesting against these newer versions? We actually think that Fix Forward is better for module developers. How many of you own a module where you have to support PowerShell 3? Yeah, that's a pain in the butt. There's just tons of stuff that we put in 5 that make your life easier. And when you have to support these old supported versions on 3 or God forbid 2, I know Pester has only just dropped support for PowerShell v2 in the latest version of Pester. It's really hard. You end up with a lot of legacy code that's more difficult to maintain. So we think that by saying, hey, everyone's got to move forward, it's actually going to be better for keeping the ecosystem more homogeneous and making sure that module developers only have a maximum of 2 or 3 versions to support at a time. How are we doing on time? 11:22. Okay, I got to move it along. We'll save questions till the end if that's okay. I don't usually like to do that, but I do want to make sure we get to everything. So limitations. Some modules are incompatible with NetCore. We've said this already. A few of the built-in modules or commandlets are missing from PowerShell Core. Oh man, I got the old deck here. It didn't update. So this is supposed to say CDXML, pinvoke, and .NET Standard modules all work great. I apologize for that, guys. There's probably going to be a to-do later in this thing because I'm clearly using an old version of the deck. A few built-in commandlets are missing, so WMIV1 commandlets, perf counter commandlets, event log, local accounts. Unfortunately, a couple of those use APIs that are private to Windows, which means that we're not allowed to redistribute those things outside of Windows. But those modules do work great if you just import them from PowerShell Core. So if they're important to you there, just do that. The one exception there is the WMIV1. Those use some APIs that are no longer available in .NET Core. There may be some ways to bring those back in the future, but generally speaking, we want everyone to move to the WMIV2 commandlets that, get sim instance, get sim class. If there's a reason why you can't do that, let me know after the talk here. We've also got a few modules missing on non-Windows platforms. These are generally used to manage things that don't have a Linux equivalent, or the Linux equivalent is so different from the Windows semantic of the thing that we haven't been able to re-implement those yet. We also removed snap-ins and workflows. With snap-ins, nobody's using them. Modules is the way to go. We want the last few snap-in owners in Microsoft to get rid of that. And with workflows, we think that the number one reason that people are using workflows is for parallelism and or concurrency. And we really want to introduce a first-class way to do concurrency within the engine, run space management, all that sort of thing. Definitely check out Steve's talk with PowerShell Core 6.1 to hear more about that. Had a quick question? SharePoint is using snap-ins, yes. So as I said, there are some teams that we are drilling down with to get rid of the last vestiges of snap-ins. Active Directory is also a snap-in. DNS client, there's a couple more, but yeah, we want to kill those once and for all. So what about Windows PowerShell? I think most of this is going to be rehashed from Jeffrey's, so I'll go quick, but still fully supported and serviced. It will not be replaced in the sense that we will not be removing Windows PowerShell and putting PowerShell Core in its place. This is actually a feature, not a bug. As someone who loves to update software all the time, I really fought hard for a while to say, why can't we take these improvements we made in 6.0 and put them in Windows PowerShell? And the reasoning is that some of them will break your stuff. We've made a few breaking changes here and there. We think they're pretty well self-contained. But generally, if we move you all to even like a Windows PowerShell 6.0, because it's a singleton on the box, it's sort of an all or nothing approach, right? And so a lot of the scripts that you move forward, if any of them break, you're probably going to be rolling back to 5.1, or you're going to have to do a bunch of work to refactor your script or find out what little esoteric language thing changed, and we don't want that to happen. So we're really, by reducing the churn in Windows PowerShell, we're actually giving you a very stable long-term platform that you can depend on for your existing workloads far into the future. So to that end, no new feature innovation. One of the ones I want to call out specifically, because I think I might have had some conversations last year with people about this, we will not be taking PSRP over SSH back into Windows PowerShell. It's not to say we never will, but until we see a really strong business case for it, we're choosing at this time to not do that. We do have a label to track backporting of issues. If you're a supported Microsoft customer and you have a really strong business case for why some bug fix that went into PowerShell Core is going to fix, your million machine deployment or whatever, you should go through your security mechanisms to let us know about that, whether it's Premier or your consultants or PFEs or whatever. And then if we have any of those, we will be tracking them under this label, consider Windows PowerShell 5.1. So some of those things will find their way back, but generally speaking, they're going to be very small, very self-contained bug fixes and servicing fixes. And security, obviously, that should go without saying. Okay, so PowerShell Standard. What is this thing? Basically, it's a universal API that defines all the set of PowerShell APIs that are exposed in both Windows PowerShell and PowerShell Core. So if you implement against this thing, you have a C# based binary commandlet, you implement against .NET Standard and PowerShell Standard, you're going to get a module that will run on Windows PowerShell and PowerShell Core. So the version number of PowerShell Standard snaps to the minimum version that API definition contains. So there's a PowerShell Standard 3.0, and if you compile against that thing, you're going to get a module that works from Windows PowerShell 3 to 5.1, and in addition, PowerShell Core 6. If you compile against PowerShell Standard 5.1, you get a whole bigger bag of goodies that let you manage the AST and all the stuff we added with DSC. but you're only going to work on Windows PowerShell 5.1 and PowerShell Core 6. Keep your eyes peeled for a blog here. It's in review. We will be putting it up on how to do that. But really quick, I want to show how easy this can be by taking an existing community module, PoshSSH. Does anybody in here use PoshSSH? Cool. So I spent about 20 or 30 minutes, having never done this before, cloned PoshSSH and got it to work on PowerShell Core. So let me show that real quick. I've got VS Code open here. And what I'm showing is actually the CS proj file for the .NET build between before my changes and after my changes. So on the left, we have a traditional, I think this is a VS 2015 or maybe even 2013 CS proj file built for a .NET framework. Yeah, can you guys not see? Bigger, bigger, bigger. Sorry. How's that? Better? Cool. So on the left, we've got all this gobbledygook. You'll see in particular this target framework version 4.5. You'll see this project tools version with all this stuff. And then as we go down, you're going to see, you know, in a couple places, he's actually referencing direct file names of DLLs. You know, this one is the stuff that's sitting in the GAC. That's the global assembly cache for .NET. So this is the global singleton of system.management.automation. You know, we can't assume, you know, say I'm building this on Linux. I don't have a GAC, right? I don't have an assembly sitting over there. And then you get to take out all this stuff too. Basically, it assumes, hey, we're building all the CS files that are in the directory. So over on the right, you'll see I'm cutting out just tons of lines. Project SDK equals this. The target framework instead of the framework version is Net Standard 2.0. And then if I get to the bottom, you'll see these package references that got added. I didn't actually add these manually. If you're using the .NET CLI, that's just .NET. If you install the .NET Core SDK, you get this thing. Basically, all I have to do is type .NET add the NuGet.org package. So if you go to NuGet.org and you have some DLL dependency, there's a little .NET CLI example thing. You just copy that example, paste it into here, and it's going to add a reference in your CS proj file to pull that dependency down at compile time. So once you've done this and you've got all your CS files in the same directory, you'll see right here I've got all those CS files here. So I'm going to navigate to that directory where the source is housed. And all I have to do is type .NET restore. This is going to make sure that all the dependencies from NuGet are available local to me. I type .NET build. This is going to do a compile. And then I type .NET publish, and I can show this here just so you're seeing that there's some activity happening. And then .NET publish is actually going to take all that stuff up, and it's going to put it in this publish directory here. So we have a couple problems that we want to solve around the fact that this publish directory has a bunch of DLLs that are available in PowerShell Core already. So you don't actually need to redistribute a lot of these DLLs with your module. But a couple of them you do, right? SSH.NET is a dependency here. This Microsoft Win32.registry is not available in .NET Core by default, so that's going to have to go with your module. But if we look here, I go into the, where are we going? Bin, debug, Net Standard 2.0, publish. All I have to do is import this module now to test it out. And you'll see now I have all of these commandlets available to me, right? So this really, like, I did this an hour before my NA talk on a whim. I wanted one more demo, and it really was really easy to do. So for those of you that own some binary modules, I know that that's not everybody in the room and not everybody cares, but I just wanted to show this is very easy to do. We're just going to go ahead and use one of these commandlets real quick to show that this is working, assuming that this IP address is the right one. What did I say, .14? Yep. 171, yep, this should work. Should is the key word here, and I'm using a key file. And you know what? I'm not actually in PowerShell Core here. Although that still should have worked. And I knew that because the credential prompt does not pop up as a window because we can't do that cross-platform. So this asks me for the SSH fingerprint. I say yes, boom, I've got a session there now. So pretty cool stuff. I can then say session ID 0, and I can run something like command uname-a, right? And you'll see we get this output telling me that I'm running on a Linux machine. That's clearly a remote session. So pretty exciting stuff. Yes, thank you. That didn't work at NA, so I appreciate it. But again, this is, just to not confuse anyone, this is not our OpenSSH bits. This is all built on top of SSH.NET. I just wanted to show when you have net standard dependencies and you're wrapping those up, it's very, very easy to get PowerShell Core compatibility, and we think that this is going to be as easy for a lot of our internal partners as well. So we're at 11:34. Let's keep cranking. Why is this my old version? I had Steve's talk on here and everything. This is what happens with bad Wi-Fi. So this is, I apologize, this is going to say to do. Great. So PowerShell Core 6.1, again, GA release is planned for late June, early July. I think we have another preview coming out next week or the week after. There's a ton of good stuff that's been added there. Check out Steve's talk whenever it is, if anybody looks at the schedule and yells it out later. Thursday? Oh, Steve's here. Yeah, his talk's on Thursday, so check it out. Is it at 14? For some reason I'm thinking that in my head. I think it's at 2 or 3. Yeah, so check it out. He's going to get into the PowerShell Core 6.1 roadmap, demo all the cool new features there. If you're not a C# developer or an SSH junkie, then you'll probably appreciate that talk a lot more. So, room for improvement. Where can we get better, right? Transparency is great, open source is great, core, cool, but where are we looking to improve? One of those is the PowerShell Committee transparency and openness. So we've got this group called the PowerShell Committee that includes a bunch of us on the team, 7 or 8 of us that make ultimate decisions on whether or not we approve RFCs, which are like the review for comment sort of specs that all functionality gets implemented through. And then we also make decisions on breaking changes. And in the past, we've sort of been doing a model where we have the argument, we hash it out, and then we say, hey, like, yeah, we approve this, or no, we reject it. Maybe we'll give like 1 or 2 sentences, but we're really not letting you guys into the conversation to understand our thought process. Because in a lot of cases, that simple thumbs up, thumbs down at the end was after 3 weeks of hour-long arguments, right? So it's not like we're not doing the thinking, but we should publish the thinking. So we've been thinking about a few things here, like we may make some of our internal meetings a little bit more public. We do the PowerShell Core community call, but maybe we could have a broadcast of our PowerShell committee meetings. Maybe we could publish transcripts. There's some stuff we can do, or maybe we could just do better write-ups when we say yes or no on stuff. So we're looking at all of that. There's a little bit of difficulty around having these sort of internal private discussions and opening them up because you want to be very candid and talk about some stuff that maybe you don't want to say in public. But we're trying to find that line and make sure that you guys are really as much a part of the decision-making process as possible. Tying right into that is RFC responsiveness. We realize that a bunch of these RFCs that are up at github.com/PowerShell/PowerShell-RFC are being approved or not, and we're not doing a great job there. So there's a lot of those that are out there that are very stale. They've been up for 6-9 months. Some of those came from the community. Some of those were generated by us. But we should be voting them up and down, and we should be responding to more feedback there. That being said, if you submit an RFC, we will weigh that RFC as a higher priority significantly more if you plan to implement that RFC. So we see a lot of RFCs that come in where people say, this feature would be awesome. I wrote up like a 5-page write-up on like the perfect spec of this, these new commandlets that are just going to change the world. They're so great. But we might not have the resources needed to do that. We might not have the expertise. Or it might not just be a priority for us for the current release. So, you could spec all this thing out, but if you're not willing to also implement that thing, then maybe that RFC is going to sit there for 6 months until someone is ready to pick up the mantle and actually implement it. Just know that if you fill out that field at the top of the RFC that says, I do plan to implement this, then we will weigh it significantly higher going forward. Breaking changes, this is another aspect where, we were able to make some breaking changes in 6.0 that we wouldn't have made if we weren't moving to a big major version and a new replat of the entire platform. Going forward, we want to have, we do have a breaking changes contract in place, but we'd like to have some clearer semantics around when we're able to make breaking changes between minor versions. I know, like, how many of you know what semantic versioning is? Okay, a few. So really quickly, semantic versioning is just this idea that sort of a contract with the community where if you rev a major version, like the first version in a version number of like A.B.C.D, then that means that you could have some breaking changes. Generally speaking, if you rev the minor version, the B, or anything after that, like the patch version or the hotfix version, then you're not supposed to make breaking changes. The difficulty, all of that makes a ton of sense when it comes to module versions. Unfortunately, when it comes to PowerShell, the ecosystem is so large and there's so many things in the language that we really don't feel like it makes any sense to rev the major version every time we make a minor breaking change. If we did that, we'd probably be on PowerShell 24 by now or something like that. Some people say we should do that, like what Chrome does, right? Just keep revving the version up. Again, don't think too hard about the numbers, like it doesn't really matter. But the point is, we should give you an opportunity to understand when we're making breaking changes, why we're making them, and give you some time from minor version to minor version to respond to those. So one of the things we could do in the future is, implement more warnings or use our new experimental feature flag system that I'm sure Steve will talk about, to sort of give you a heads up a couple minor versions in advance that a breaking change will be coming and give you ways to prepare for that. So, yeah. The last one is reference documentation. We know the commandlet documentation is not always awesome. We're taking steps to address that. We've got some new doc writers. We also realize that there's some backfilling that we have to do as an engineering team to document some of the older parameters, but just know that there's some stuff in place. We're definitely trying to strive for improvement there. So, very briefly, call to action for you guys. Please use PowerShell Core on non-Windows platforms. Tell us what works, what doesn't. If you've got a MacBook at home, it's not your work machine or whatever, just throw PowerShell Core in there. Try some of your little helper scripts. Tell us if they work, if they don't. File issues, contribute code, documentation. You don't have to be a guru like Jeffrey said to contribute. A lot of these things, you could fix an error message. You could fix some documentation. You could, fix some of the helper build scripts that we have in part of PowerShell. So just come check it out. We've got this label up for grabs that will really some good starter issues if you're looking to be a new contributor. Join the PowerShell community call. We do this the third Thursday of every month, except for this Thursday because we're all here. But this is a great opportunity. They're about an hour long. We do them in the morning in Pacific time so that people have a chance to join here. I think it's like 6 p.m. or something like that here in Europe. So please check that out. It's bi-directional. We let people, talk on the call, voice their concerns. The chat is filled with suggestions and questions, and we just give you sort of a pulse heartbeat of what we're doing in the project and where we're at sort of as it progresses. Please port your modules to PowerShell Standard. Again, there's going to be a blog on this, but do it. File issues on PowerShell Standard. Upload your modules to the gallery. And lastly, give feedback to the product teams that own PowerShell modules. Somebody gave me a great suggestion in NA last week. They said, hey, can you put up the table of all the modules and where the product teams source feedback so that I can go and kick their butt? And I said, that is a great idea. It's going to take me a while, but I do have a master spreadsheet of all the modules I know about, and I will do my best to get that table up. So, PowerShell, before we move on to OpenSSH, does anyone have any questions there? I'm at 11:42. I'm definitely going to get in trouble on this OpenSSH one. Just real quick, yeah. Is there script lock logging on PowerShell Core? I think there is, yes. But I think there were a couple things around the ETW manifest registration that we didn't do right in 6.0 that got fixed in 6.1. And if you look at the 6.1 MSI installer, there's like a box to check now to register the ETW manifest. So if there was any shortcomings before, I think we've backfilled them in 6.1. Cool. Real quick.
If they come, will it come to both core and
Windows PowerShell?
So the question was around some new Office 365 functionality, and if there are PowerShell modules for that, will it work on Windows PowerShell and PowerShell Core? We still have a lot of education to do with a lot of teams. It's a big company, and I'm doing my best. I would say that likely they'll launch with Windows PowerShell modules, and we'll have to educate them to get there to PowerShell Core. But the teams that are actively developing on modules are a lot more amenable to porting and understanding Core than the teams that haven't touched the PowerShell module in 5 years. So in a lot of those cases, they have the resources and and the motivation to make sure that the stuff that they put out today is as modern as possible. So if they don't, we'll go talk to them and fix it. I'm going to go to the end because I do want to make sure I get through this OpenSSH stuff real quick. OpenSSH, what is it? It's a suite of tools for public and private key management. Think of this for you Windows guys as like certificate management. Same kind of thing. You have a public key that you give to everybody. You have a private key that you treat like your password and share with no one. Remote authentication and administration. Remoting to other boxes, administering them, running commands against other machines, getting reporting back. It's remoting in a nutshell. And secure file transfers. So there's both SCP and SFTP, secure copy and secure file transfer protocol. These things allow you to shuffle files on and off of machines in a very secure way. So I want to say thank you to the OpenBSD Foundation. We've been working with them for a lot of this stuff. OpenSSH has been an invaluable tool of the ecosystem for 20 plus years, and their fork of OpenSSL and LibreSSL allowed us to get a lot more of the cryptology, can't speak at all, the cryptography algorithms into Windows that we wouldn't have been able to do with OpenSSL. So this is all the stuff that gets included as part of the OpenSSH packages. Win32-OpenSSH is a native port of all of this goodness to Windows. There are a lot of OpenSSH implementations out there in the wild. They've been made by vendors. I used OpenSSH on my Windows box like 15 years ago or whenever it was. We have ported, all of those implementations use some kind of POSIX translation layer. So there's all these semantics that are supported across all the Unix systems and all the Linux distributions called POSIX. We've taken all that stuff, instead of going through a translation layer like SideWin or MinGW or all these things that sort of quick and dirty get Linux applications running on Windows, we've ported everything to be semantically native to Windows. So that means having two services that actually run as Windows services. It means integrating with LSASS and all these different authentication semantics that exist only on Windows. So it's been a ton of work, but in the Fall Creators Update, we shipped a beta client and server that were each a feature on demand. For those of you that saw my blog post, this was kind of a pain to configure this server. So in the future, we're going to be turning the client on by default. So in the next major release of Windows 10, you open a terminal, you type SSH, you have SSH. We're super excited about that. The server is still optional, but both will be production ready and supported. The server will be significantly easier to configure than what I had on my blog. Host keys get auto-generated if you don't have them already. You don't have to reackle all this stuff because we just do it for you. So we're really, really excited. Definitely keep your eyes peeled. Another blog coming there soon. As for down-level support, we don't have any plans today to officially support down-level builds, but what we have on GitHub is tested and is compatible with machines down-level to Windows Server 2008 R2 and Windows 7. We're trying to figure out how we introduce servicing and supportability mechanisms to officially support that stuff, but we don't have any plans or ETAs to share there yet. If you do have any requirements around supporting OpenSSH on machines earlier than the next release of Windows Server and Windows 10, please come talk to me afterwards. So what's next for Windows Win32 OpenSSH? Well, one of them is that we don't want to call it Win32 OpenSSH anymore. We just want it to be the Windows 32 build of OpenSSH Portable, which is the official upstream project. So we've been working with the OpenBSD Foundation to achieve that. There's also a longer tail of unsupported features that we'd like to add. This is a lot of really esoteric keys that sit in SSHD config that allow you to farm out authorization or authentication to external providers. Another one is, again, a servicing model for downloadable platforms. And then we're also working on I'm trying to blank right now, guys. But yeah, that's really the big stuff. Those are both going to take forever. So just know that we're working hard there to get upstream so that we can have really a single branch for OpenSSH for the whole world that just includes Windows support. New features, definitely come talk to me afterwards. Again, what folks need on Windows that isn't there today. We think that the vast majority of scenarios are covered now as long as you can get onto a box and ship files to and from a box and off using all these different mechanisms, that you're probably okay. But we know that some larger enterprises have some requirements for some of those more esoteric keys that we still need to support. So what I want to show real quick, if I don't get in too much trouble, I know I'm at 11:48. Can I keep going? Okay. Just check in with the taskmaster here. So PowerShell remoting over SSH with 2FA. So I'm not going to be showing the Win32-OpenSSH server. This is a Linux server running a traditional OpenSSH server. I'm saying the word server a lot. So this is a Linux machine running an OpenSSH server using a PAM module. This is a platform authentication module, I believe. I'm getting the thing right, but it's basically a little piece of code that allows SSH to ask the operating system to actually do the authentication using some other mechanism than what it supports natively. And here I'm using a PAM module for Google Authenticator. So for those of you that are using two-factor authentication, which hopefully you are by now with everything, the Google Authenticator application is also supported by Azure Authenticator. I use Authy personally. But basically, I can now remote to a box, a Linux machine, running PowerShell, hooked up to the OpenSSH server, and using the SSH client on my end, it's going to establish that connection. The PAM module is going to ask me for a password and then a verification code, and I'm going to put all that in, and it's going to let me connect. So let's check that out. Let me see, okay, cool. So here, we've got PowerShell Core. We look here, I'm running on Windows. I'm going to say, which SSH am I using? This is the one in System32 that's been installed by default on this box. Oh, yep, definitely. My apologies. I'm the first to remind people, and I'm the first to forget. Is that big enough, everybody? Cool, okay. So again, which SSH? This is the one sitting in System32. I'm going to SSH to this box here. And you'll see that when I connect, I instantly get through, right? So this is because I have a public key that has been sitting in my home directory that I've already added as an authorized key. We go look at my, my authorized key file here. This is the one that I can share with the whole world, and the private key is sitting in my home directory on my Windows box. When the private key goes to the other side and goes through the algorithm, matches it up against the public key, and it says, hey, yeah, this guy's allowed to come in the door. So what we're going to do is actually open up our SSHD config. It's going to ask me for my password here. And you'll notice I've got use PAM set to yes. Oh, excellent. Well, can you see use PAM yes? Excellent. Everything else is commented, so don't worry about it. If I delete this letter, now you see another line. This is the line that I care about. So this says, hey, basically, if you have a public key, there are two ways that we'll support you coming in the front door. One of those is to also use a password. One of those is to use your 2FA key. So the first one that it's going to ask me for is that 2FA key. I'm also going to look at the PAM configuration on the other side, and I have an SSHD specific PAM configuration. And I'll go to the bottom here, and you'll see that I've added this line that basically says, hey, use this Google Authenticator PAM module. I installed this with just one apt-get call. You get the thing, hey, add this one line, and you're good to go. So now I'm going to go ahead and restart the SSH service, and we're going to leave this connection. So now if I go in, the first thing that's going to happen is the public key is going to match, and it's going to let me through to the keyboard interactive auth where I can do the 2FA. So you'll see here, it's going to ask me for my password. And then if I go to my Authy machine, I didn't do this fast enough. One thing, like the time code that you have to use is the one from when you hit enter the first time. So if you take too long, then the code that works is not the one that's there anymore. That might have been the case just now. So I'm going to kill this and wait till another code generates here. Depending on how you configure it, yeah. Like I think the default is 1 per key or something like that. But there's a million timeout things that they offer. Of course. Okay, let's try this real quick. I don't know why I think that this is going to work instead, but let's go ahead and try it. So this is actually the parameter set that you use for SSH. You'll see I say dash hostname and then dash username instead of dash credential. Make sure that another code got regened here. Make sure that I'm looking at the right thing. So again, this is going to ask me for my password. And 132.133. Yay! So look at that. I have two-factor authentication using this. I now have a session. Thanks, guys. I hate holding for applause, but you're so friendly, everyone. So I can actually enter this session, and you'll see that the transport layer here is SSH, so this is not going over WinRM. And if I enter this, hey, look at that. I now have PS version table. I can't spell. I should use tab completion. Unix, yay, OS Linux. And if I run uname-a, look at that. I'm running on Linux. So this is really awesome. Like the point here is there's an entire ecosystem built up around SSH on Linux. And because we didn't do anything special when implementing PSRP over SSH, all that stuff is just going to work. You can farm out all kinds of different PAM modules that allow you to authenticate in all kinds of different ways, and you're just going to get all of that for free when using PowerShell on Linux. We do want to introduce something similar to this on Windows. We have a mechanism for SSH calling out to authentication providers, not PAM modules, but authentication providers on Windows, and we do want to expose that in a way that we could possibly do 2FA in the future for Windows servers as well. But you're going to see a whole lot more scenarios around SSH. Again, we see it as the future. Azure wants SSH everywhere, and we're really, really excited that we've got this first class into PowerShell. So before I wrap up, I know I'm way over time and I'm going to get yelled at, but I really would love it if you guys haven't seen this already. We have a survey running right now about the 2 different editions, if there's any confusion around them, whether you like the naming, whether there's other stuff we can improve. We've gotten an awesome number of responses so far, and I'd really love for you guys to fill that out as well. We now have not a 15-minute break, but I think a 5-minute break, or we've got lunch now, right? So lunch break. So we got a whole hour. It's totally fine that I took all this time. But thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you coming. And for any other complaints that you have about PowerShell, you know where to find me. So.